Hello everyone, my name is Trevor, I go by TheMrTrails, welcome to the channel. Today's video is rather different from usual, but I hope you enjoy. So in this past week, I found myself rather bored, and on the master list of things to do when I'm bored is to do something involving something from my childhood for some good old nostalgia. And the thing I decided to do was watch some of the classic Yu-Gi-Oh anime, as throughout my childhood I watched the original series, Yu-Gi-Oh! GX and Yu-Gi-Oh! 5Ds. The last time I got into it was in early college with my roommates, and then when the new Link monster type was coming out, we kind of stopped playing as the rules kind of forced you to play with Link monsters rather than giving you a choice in the matter. The rules have since been changed to make original strategies work again, but anyway, I had been thinking about merging Dauntless with some other game for a while now, but nothing ever really came about those efforts to this point. That is, until I had the idea at some point that it would be interesting to turn things from Dauntless into Yu-Gi-Oh cards. And it makes a whole lot of sense to do. Monsters are a key part of both games. It's just instead of fighting monsters as a human, in Yu-Gi-Oh! You fight each other with monsters. Now plenty of people have made Yu-Gi-Oh! Cards before, probably even millions of people have, but usually when people make Yu-Gi-Oh! Cards, they are just very overpowered, win you the game type of cards. But I didn't just want to make the Behemoths into cards. I wanted to give them abilities that not only made sense for them to have, but abilities that would make sense and be balanced in the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! Today. Now I thought the balancing part of that would be an issue, however I realized that the state of power creep in Yu-Gi-Oh! Is so laughable that a lot of decks that can kill your opponent on your first turn aren't really even used, because better strategies exist somehow. So balancing the cards wouldn't really be that big of a deal as long as I didn't give them a super generic draw effect or really easy win you the duel effect. Anyway, allow me to show you turning Dauntless Behemoths into Yu-Gi-Oh! Monsters. Consider dropping that like for me and let's get into it. So the first step in making a series of Yu-Gi-Oh! Cards that will interact with each other well is to give them an archetype. An archetype in Yu-Gi-Oh! Is basically a set group of cards that interact with one another, having similar names and or effects. What turning the Behemoths into an archetype will do here is allow us to reference a certain portion of the name of the cards to say that only those type of cards get the benefits of using the effects. Most card archetypes have effects that will summon monsters of that archetype easily, or allow you to add those cards of that archetype to your hand. If I were to just simply call them Behemoths, or if I made Slayers to call them Slayers, that would pose an issue, as both of these have several cards with that in their name, and you usually don't want an archetype to interact with random cards, because that's how some things can get broken from time to time. So the next thing I thought would make sense was to name the archetype Shattered Isles, as this is where Behemoths and Slayers come from, and there's only one card in the game that has Shattered in its name, meaning no weird interactions. Now that I had an archetype name, I had to decide on some gimmicks that the archetype revolved around, as well as the ultimate goal of the archetype. Behemoths and Dauntless come in a wide range of levels, and when you're dealing with a wide range of levels in Yu-Gi-Oh!, this generally rules out XYZ monsters, as you need monsters of the same level to be able to summon them. So I would make a couple of these, but I wasn't going to make this the main strategy. Pendulum monsters could also be an option with a variety of levels, but I felt this didn't really make sense in the context of Dauntless, since summoning 6 Behemoths at a time isn't something that the game does to you. So if I were to make some pendulum monster for them, I would have to limit the summoning capabilities of them. So this basically left Synchro, Fusion, and Link monsters as my main options. I thought that fusions would make sense for the elemental variant Behemoths, while Synchro monsters would make a lot of sense for something like the Escalation boss monsters. And I could take it a step further from that, with the heroic variants of the Escalation bosses requiring their original version plus some other high-level Behemoth to create them potentially for an XYZ monster. So this could serve as the ultimate goal of the archetype, being able to summon one of the heroic Escalation bosses to the field. But now I would have to structure the cards around some gimmicks to be able to make that happen. I'll run you through the process of making the first few cards and then we'll speed things up after. I figured the first step in this would be the first step in any Dauntless playthrough with the lesser Behemoths. So Yu-Gi-Oh! Actually has 7 attributes of monsters, just like Dauntless has 7 elements of Behemoths. However, I wasn't going to give neutral Behemoths the divine attribute because that just didn't make any sense. I decided I would come back to the neutral Behemoths some point later. This leaves us with 3 lesser Behemoths, being Embermane, Boreus, and Drask. So we had lesser Embermane of the Shattered Isles as my first card. Obviously, lesser Behemoths aren't good in combat, so they would have low attack and defense values, but lesser Embermane specifically I wanted to make sure had 200 defense points, as there is a lot of fire monster support in Yu-Gi-Oh! Revolving around exactly 200 defense points points. Lesser Embermane would be a level 1 fire monster, as you would expect, being given the beast typing as well. And it makes sense for the lower level behemoths to be tuner monsters to allow some of the synchro plays to happen further along. I decided one of the gimmicks was going to be having the lesser behemoths discard themselves to add the regular behemoths from the deck to the hand. I also wanted to give the archetype some type of graveyard or banishing effects, so I decided to go with banishing effects here. One major struggle in making a Yu-Gi-Oh card that makes sense these days is the exact grammar and wording that you have to use to make the effects activate when you intend for them to activate. I decided on this being the effect for Lesser Embermane. During your main phase, you can discard this card to add one level 3 Shattered Isles monster from your deck to your hand. If this card is banished by your card effect, you can excavate the top card of your deck, and if it is a Shattered Isles card, you may add it to your hand, otherwise send it to the graveyard. You can only use each effect of Lesser Embermane of the Shattered Isles once per turn. So the idea here is you search your deck for regular Embermane. If Lesser Embermane is in your hand, then you'd be able to add a card to your hand after Lesser Embermane has been removed from play. Part of the balance for its second effect is that it has to be by your card effect and not your opponent's card effect, which is a restriction I figured the whole archetype should have. And I thought this effect was all perfect and good. However, after watching a video on confusing rulings, I realized this wording might actually prevent Lesser Embermane from proccing off of regular Embermane if I don't word it correctly. There would be a similar ruling here with Dark World monsters, where if they are discarded as a cost, they don't activate their effect. So I either had to change this wording to say buy a card you control, or to make sure that the banishing was not a cost, but an additional action of the effect. My Dauntless friends, if you couldn't tell, Yu-Gi-Oh is confusing. I decided to make sure the effects were not using them as a cost instead, as that would kind of balance the archetype by not allowing them to be a cost either. Anyway, for the last line of the effect, the point of spelling out the whole name of the card is to make sure that you wouldn't be able to loop the effect with multiple copies of the card in your deck, and is the main way to make sure effects of these types of cards are only actually used once per turn. An important thing in Yu-Gi-Oh is called card economy, and it's basically saying how many cards do you have on your field and in your hand compared to your opponent. I think this card is a pretty balanced +1 in card economy, because for the cost of your one Lesser Embermane, you get a regular Embermane as well as another Shattered Isles card from your deck to your hand. But there are a couple of ways that your opponent can counteract these type of effects, even if they don't have anything on the field, using hand traps. But all I had left to do was give the card a picture. So I took some selfies with Lesser Embermane and played around with it in an online photo editor to give the picture more life and cartoonize the picture a tad. When I felt like it was good, I saved the picture, uploaded it to the card, and bang, I had created the first of the cards. This is what I did for each of the behemoth pictures, meaning that all of them are from some in-game screenshot that was edited. Some of these pictures turned out really good, but others not so much because of this. After saving the card, I killed the Lesser Embermane and moved on to the next card. And I wanted to solidify what it was I was going to do with regular Embermane next, so I started working on that. From Lesser Embermane's effect, I had already decided that regular Embermane was going to be a level 3 monster, still a fire type, and I would give it the 200 defense to synergize with other fire monsters. I decided, for no particular reason, it would have 1000 attack and keep the beast and tuner functions of the Lesser Embermane. Then it was for the effect, and any good archetype in Yu-Gi-Oh these days has some method to special summon monsters from your hand. So I decided the regular behemoths would be able to special summon themselves from the hand by banishing one of the lesser behemoths from the graveyard, which would then activate the lesser behemoth's excavation effects. And through the excavation, you would be able to add the dire version of the behemoth to your hand. So I gave Embermane the effect that states, during your main phase, if you have a level 2 or lower Shattered Isles monster in your graveyard, you can special summon this card from your hand, then banish that monster. If this card is special summoned, you can choose one level 5 Shattered Isles monster from your deck and place it on top of your deck. You can only use each effect of Embermane of the Shattered Isles once per turn. So the first effect is what I was talking about. I made having the Lesser Embermane in the graveyard an activation requirement of the effect. Then I make the effect both summon Embermane and banish the other card. This sets up a good combo for the deck when you have the lesser version of the behemoth in your hand, and doesn't inherently give you all of the access to the combos from having the regular version in your hand. And these two have created the setup for Bloodfire Embermane, Embermane's dire variant. I figured Bloodfire Embermane should be able to summon itself onto the field if regular Embermane is on the field, and have some type of effect that would make a synchro summon possible from there. So Bloodfire Embermane's effect would be, if you control a level 3 or 4 4 Shattered Isles monster, you can banish that monster, then special summon this card from your hand. Then, if this card is summoned, you can target exactly 2 of your banished level 3 or lower Shattered Isles monsters and special summon them, and if you do, this card loses 1000 attack and defense. And you can only use each effect of Bloodfire Embermane of the Shattered Isles once per turn. The losing of the attack and defense sets up for the other 200 defense fire monster synergy, while also making sure that since you are spamming several monsters onto the field with the effect, that the monsters will at least be weak. The effect also forces you to summon 2 banished monsters, which you cannot do if you don't have 2 things banished or if you are running out of room on the field. So from here I needed to figure out how things would scale upward to getting out the heroic escalation bosses. It would make sense if you needed somewhat specific materials to make the regular versions of the escalation bosses, including using a heroic version of the Behemoths. So I figured next I would make heroic Embermane, and it would make sense at this stage heroic Embermane would be a synchro monster, requiring a tuner that would be summoned by Bloodfire Embermane, as well as using the Bloodfire Embermane for it. But I didn't want to make the summoning requirements super strict so the rest of the archetype would still be able to summon them. I decided on a 1+ tuners and a 1 non-tuner monster restriction, which would still be relatively easy for the rest of the archetype to summon, but most other archetypes actually can't spam out tuners in this manner. I thought it would be nice for heroic Embermane to get a good effect to mill Shattered Isles cards into your graveyard, and also have an attack boosting effect on the side. So at this point I had created an engine that would be able to spit out a synchro beat stick onto the field, as well as the potential to get a few extra cards from the archetype into the graveyard. What I had planned is that the escalation bosses would be level 10 synchro monsters, requiring a synchro behemoth to be used, and this forces you to use additional members of the archetype to summon the boss monsters, as what we've created only tallies up to 9 stars. So I next wanted to tackle the Boreus family, as I already had an idea of the special abilities I wanted them to have. Boreus in Dauntless is very good at summoning its minions, which it would make sense if Boreus in Yugioh did roughly the same thing. Most anything that's ice related in Yugioh is given the water attribute, and I figured I would be able to make regular Boreus in some way be able to synergize with level 2 aqua monsters. So I would give lesser Boreus a similar search effect to get regular Boreus, as well as a banishing ability to be able to make the regular Boreus an aqua type. Regular Boreus would be given the classic 100 attack, 2000 defense combo of these sort of monsters, and an ability that would let you banish bigger Boreus from the deck if you were able to make it an aqua type. Then I made it so if Dreadfrost Boreus is banished from the deck, you can special summon it. And if it's summoned, you're able to reveal up to 3 cards in your hand and summon a Boreus fauna token for each, and decrease the level of Dreadfrost Boreus for each one summoned. This may have been a bit too broken of a token effect, so I made it so these could not be used except for Shattered Isles monsters. Then I even made a Boreus fauna token card. I think the mechanic here is pretty interesting, as if you have 1 or 3 other cards to reveal, you can summon heroic Boreus, but if you only want to reveal 2 other cards, you can summon heroic Embermane instead. So another thing that would be interesting in terms of other Yu-Gi-Oh things that I couldn't really avoid here is that there's a heroic challenger archetype, which for some of the cards they give heroic monsters benefits, meaning these heroic behemoths would be able to use those cards. I let this slide because a number of the effects still require specifically heroic challengers, but to prevent this you could just abbreviate heroic to H or something. Anyway, I would also give the heroic Boreus the ability to summon Boreus fauna tokens, but even more of them with a harsher penalty of banishing cards from the deck face down. And even though this would be able to summon a ton of levels to the field for you, you would still need a card of some other behemoth to be able to summon an escalation boss off of this, since the levels don't match up. The Boreus family got a somewhat similar effect to the new Sword Soul archetype, as I've been having quite a bit of fun with that lately. The last lesser behemoth we had was Drask, and many things dealing with electricity and thunder in Yu-Gi-Oh are given the wind attribute, and I figured I would make things synergize a bit with the wind attribute here, at the cost of a little bit of within the archetype effects. So lesser Drask will still allow you to search a level 3 Shattered Isles monster, but it has to be banished by a wind attribute monster you control to get the banishing effect. Then regular Drask would be able to special summon itself from the hand or graveyard by banishing a level 2 wind attribute monster, and if such monster is special summoned while it's on the field, you're able to add a Shattered Isles spell or trap card to your hand. I gave Drask and Thunderdeep Drask a couple of effects dealing with spell and trap cards because I felt like I had been lacking in those effects so far. And I decided that since you meet Thunderdeep Drask at the same time as Heroic Boreus, that it would be fine to make Thunderdeep Drask a synchro monster. But once I made Thunderdeep Drask, I felt it was time to make a couple of the escalation bosses next, since you will need those monsters to summon out the ultimate goal monsters of the deck. Now you might wonder how long it takes trying to create and balance the effects of an archetype and producing the imagery of those cards, and I was about 12 cards in at this point, including the token, and between that and what is now page 6 of the script for the video, I had already spent about 9 or 10 hours on this. And it would have been a lot longer had I actually had to draw all of these cards. Moving on, for the escalation bosses, I decided I would give them an additional ability if they were summoned using a Shattered Isles synchro monster. But again, I wanted the bosses to be somewhat difficult to bring out, so I made a synchro monster a requirement for the material. Since I was coming off of making Drask, I started with Malkarion, and for Malkarion I went with something similar to what I had just done for Thunderdeep Drask, and giving it a bonus ability for being a wind attribute synchro monster as material. And destroying all spell and traps your opponent controls is a pretty good effect for doing so, but it being specific to wind attribute synchro summons makes it a tad bit more generic. I gave it a one-time while on the field negate ability, and gave it potentially unlimited protection from being destroyed or banished by spell and trap cards, by being able to banish a card from your graveyard to save it. For Torgadoro and the other Blaze Behemoths, I decided to stick with some attack power manipulation, and giving it a pretty beefy attack power increase when summoned with a Shattered Isles synchro monster. I then gave it protection from being targeted by card effects, and if it were to be destroyed or banished aside from that, you would be able to return it to the extra deck by banishing things from the graveyard. For Urska, I really enjoyed how the card picture came out, and I think part of that had to deal with it being in a cave, allowing me to get a bit of a glow effect. I could have done that for everything really if I had just used Photoshop, but I decided to go with the online program instead. I decided if Urska was summoned with a Shattered Isles monster, to destroy all other special summoned monsters on the field. I thought it would be neat to give it a more unique kind of target of protection, where you would make it so you change the target of the effect that it's being targeted by. And I wanted to stick with the summon tokens theme from Boreus, so I made it summon Frost Embermane's Styxians as tokens. I thought this does make at least a little bit of sense, because even though it's like a cat-dog type of relationship between them, Urska is still kind of like bigger brother Frost Embermane. Then I figured I still needed to make at least one of the true boss monsters of the deck, so I went with Heroic Urska. I figured the Heroic Urska bosses should be archetype specific and incentivize you to actually use one of the regular Urska bosses to bring it out, and I figured I would be making some level 10 main deck monsters for this at some point later on, so it would be best to keep the effects of the cards specific to when you use the synchro monsters for the summon. So the Heroic Urska bosses could be summoned using the main deck monsters, but would just serve as a 4000 attack point beater with no effects. But I wanted its effects to be worth it when you'd used the synchro monster to summon it, not being able to be targeted or destroyed by card effects, being able to detach an Xyz material to banish all other cards on the field face down, then drawing a card, being able to summon Frost Embermane tokens for no cost, and if tokens are summoned, you're able to prevent your opponent from using monster effects for the remainder of the turn. My issue I have with this card is it's not actually Heroic Urska on there, it's just regular Urska, so for my own sanity, I'd probably redo the picture, even though there's not a visual difference between the two. But that is as far as I've gotten at this point, and I decided to stop here for now, because at this point, 8 pages of script and 18.5 minutes later, here we are. 15 monster cards and 2 token cards made, taking a good 12 to 14 hours or so to do, and a good few more hours to edit this video. I've made my own Yu-Gi-Oh cards in the past, but I don't think they ever took this long to make. Part of that, I think, was trying to make them good but balanced, but also have proper grammar. The main question is, did I succeed in making them balanced, or did I accidentally make the second coming of the Dragon Rulers? Someone who's a bit more familiar with the current state of Yu-Gi-Oh than myself would have to let me know on that one. I feel like they're pretty balanced, but the only way to really test them out would be to duel with them. As for my Dauntless peeps still hanging, hopefully you enjoyed this twist on the monsters we already know and love. Let me know which of the cards you think are your favorite. I think I like how regular Embermane, lesser Drask, and regular Urska turned out the best. And I'll probably end up doing more of this at some point, and if you'd like me to share that with you guys, be sure to smash the like button. And consider subscribing to the channel if you are new, and I have been Trevor. I go go by TheMrTrails, and I will catch you guys next time.